Yeah,
go,
thank you.
Go on, yeah.
Thank you for the invitation, thank you for the introduction. This is a presentation of my doctoral thesis, and it is the first time I'm presenting the entire thesis in a short form. My final seminar was presented last month. I have been finalizing the draft the last couple of weeks. So this is mostly a finished project. But I'm very open to any kinds of questions. I'm really open, and I'm also happy to be able to present this work in full in the first time in a Russian expert audience. As said before, yeah, I have this diverse background. At the moment, I'm based at the Södertörn University. The project has been funded by the Baltic Sea Foundation, and part of it has been funded by a joint European Union-Russian Erasmus research grant in 2015. So the title of my doctoral thesis is Urban Policies for Globalizing Periphery, with the case studies from Eastern Russia. Yeah, and here's the structure of the thesis, of the presentation actually. I will give a short introduction about the research problem, my aims, the research questions and methods, and I will proceed with the main elements of the background that defined my study, and meaning some historical information, some theoretical starting points, and so on. And then I will present my cases. I will proceed with the analysis of the cases, and I will close with a couple of conclusions. On the next slide, to sum it up, in this thesis I'm approaching the issue of policy transfer in 3 cases of urban renewal policies in Eastern Russia. So I'm looking at international ideas and their localization in this peripheral setting, in local, regional, and national levels. I'm also trying to question the relevance of the post-socialist urban studies frame in the present. And but in overall, this is a typical study of the global local research range. The main problem that this study identifies is the insufficient amount of research on international urban renewal policies in secondary cities. So to me, this relates to a phenomenon that is identified in urban studies and globalization research in the last decades, which is actually threefold. So it is the internationalization of the quest for attractiveness among urban policy regimes. So I will try to explain in short these 3 elements. What I mean by internationalization is, together with globalization, concepts that have been addressed for a few decades now. And they used to be, at least at first, they were limited in a few economically and politically and socio-culturally dominant cities. But now this internationalization and this notion of globalization has spread across the planet, actually, in both capital cities and in large metropolises, but also in secondary cities. In this discussion of globalization, cities have been framed as taking part in a race, so as participating in some kind of a battle, where they are supposedly competing for attractiveness. What I mean by attractiveness is the idea of attracting talent, the idea of attracting investments, the idea of attracting innovation, and these elements. These have become key tasks for policymakers, for politicians, for professionals, for business people, and for theorists. And it is important to remember that this has happened within a very few years. It has happened in less than a decade, and it has spread across most of the world now. And to that comes the third element, which is the idea of the urban policy regimes, in which urban policy regimes are actually seeking to increase attractiveness via urban renewal, among other means. Urban renewal, as understood as policies that actually seek to upgrade part of the city, which will then be more attractive to investments and innovation and the like, as described above. So we have these three elements: the internationalization, the quest for attractiveness, and this transfer of this quest to processes of urban renewal. This phenomenon has been very well documented and very well theorized over the last decades. And it has also included a policy transfer approach in the last years. I am also addressing the issue of transfer of policies, but in this thesis, I'm moving to a specific group of cities that have not attracted so much attention. And these are secondary cities in contexts that are not fully internationalized. By not fully internationalized, I mean regions that have become parts of this internationalization processes recently and under specific conditions. So what I'm actually asking is that how these very same international policies are arriving in this kind of cities, which are secondary and have some specific conditionality in the way they have become internationalized. So the question is this: how the policies arrive and how they are translated, how they are implemented, how they are materialized, and how they are perhaps instrumentalized. And this also comes from another observation I had a couple of years ago, that this kind of cities are actually the majority of cities in the world now, although it might seem the opposite. But urban studies research has not really covered this gap, and I see this as a bit unfair or uneven, or some kind of uneven distribution of scholar interest. And to that comes this thesis to work on this gap. My aims and research questions are as follows. I'm actually demonstrating how ideas are conditioned into processes, and with the main aim being to make sense of how this process manifests itself in space. So in order to break this further down, the analysis will answer the following research questions that you see here. They are applied in each of my three cases. And these are A, the moments of normative change; B, the landscape of actors involved; 3, the multi-level state and private resources that have been invested in these processes; and D is the physical output of this double process of localizing and globalizing, as I will explain later. Then comes my method page, which is a very short description. It's been a largely empirical work. It's been based on extensive ethnographic work in Siberia and in the Far East. Mainly took place in 2015 during my research at the Siberian Federal University in Krasnoyarsk, but there were some follow-ups in 2017, 2018. I concluded with some fieldworks during these 4 years between 2016 and now. And the main parts of the qualitative work consists of 3 components: attending specific thematic events, conducting interviews, half of which were expert interviews, and a large archive of observations, which has resulted in a long diary and photographic archive. But the analysis is also heavily based on the study of state documents in local, regional, federal level, but also the media discourse that has evolved in the last 4 years, and putting much more emphasis on local media, local and regional media than federal Russian media. So before going into the theoretical part of the study, I just want to give a brief introduction of the historical background of the urban development in Russia that I had to do in order to understand better the context of the phenomenon I'm studying. Urban development in Russia, with a special emphasis on the policies for urbanizing Eastern Russia. So there is a number of features that I consider that keep on appearing when looking at this bibliographic material, which is a long-established mechanism for urban and territorial development in Russia, which is historically centralized around Moscow and Petersburg, and a similarly centralized mechanism of knowledge production and knowledge transmission in this large space. Specifically with regards to Siberia and the Russian Far East, I identify an element which is well rooted across history, across all reports about Siberia, and it seems that there is a rooted perception of Siberia both by outsiders but also by local people, or as of something that somebody could call a Janus-phased entity. So borrowing from the Roman or earlier, I think, Persian mythology, Janus is an element that is possible. It has two faces in this, and in the case of Siberia, I use this concept to describe this historic tradition of Siberia being capable of, or being envisioned about being capable of becoming the best, but also producing the worst. So being potentially a very rich region, but actually remaining not that rich, having the capacity for unlimited development, but remaining very sparsely inhabited, having this availability of freedom, which is a very special kind of freedom, but at the same time experiencing moments in history where this freedom was totally absent. And this is some thread that some could see appearing already from the 18th century up to our days. And the fourth component that I consider important is, again, from mythology, what I call a Sisyphean succession of projects that attempt to articulate the territory and integrate it in the Russian or also global functions. With projects such as the BAM Railway or the Virgin Lands campaign, or the concept of the territorial production complex. So projects mainly undertook during the Soviet period, many of which were kind of not entirely successful. Some others were more successful. The Trans-Siberian, for example, is a very important project of global significance. And what all these projects share, to my understanding, is that they all require the consumption of huge amount of resources to be materialized. And thereby I'm using this kind of Sisyphean concept that there has been a huge attempt, but there has been not an equivalent return of this investment in resources, in human effort. A couple of words about the theoretical framework. I studied a lot of bibliography regarding the post-socialist and post-Soviet urban studies. From there, I keep the concept of the institutional fix. And using that, I'm going to the global city discourse that became very popular in the 90s and the 2000s. But by now, I consider this to have developed several shortcomings. And in that, I will be kind of arguing for pushing the barrier a bit and talking about spatial and institutional landscapes that are actually globalizing. So, and that could be an umbrella that describes more cities and more updated than the term post-socialist, which I consider a bit outdated by now. So taking that a bit further, I will be framing the cities in Eastern Russia, so cities beyond the Urals, as a globalizing elsewhere. And in that, I'm attempting to bring together two concepts. So the outsider's understanding of Siberia and the Far East as something uncanny, and the insider's perspective for these cities. So neither post-socialist nor global, but as in the process of becoming globalized. So from there, I'm also discussing policy transfer and highlighting the importance of the mutations that appear when policies are transferred in these contexts. I highlight three common policies. These are boosterism policies, the revitalization projects, and the policies for corporate social responsibility. And with that, I will be presenting in short the three cases. I consider them to be three aspects of urban renewal policies and three ways to approach, for me, these are also three ways to approach the specificities of this peripheral context, which I will be framing as uneven institutional landscapes. And coming from that to the specific cases, as you can see, these are three cases associated with three specific projects, which actually are quite different. They look different and they are different, and they fundamentally represent different processes. But I find several threads that connect them. So I will not be attempting to compare. I will be attempting to discover a common thread towards the end of the presentation. So the first case is a typical case of boosterist policy. My analysis for boosterism in Russia leads me to conclude that boosterism in Russia has been introduced almost without effort, almost as an integral part of previous existing urban and territorial developmental strategy in the last decades, the last 15 years actually. And in the case of Vladivostok, this has been the case of the summit in 2012, the APEC summit. And here I will be arguing that boosting the development of this city for improvement and increasing the attractiveness of Vladivostok, the international attractiveness of Vladivostok, has not been confined in this single mega event, in this single moment, as some other mega event study would perhaps assume. But I would argue that this has been established as a default condition since then. So it has been done for actually a decade already. And I know that this is not very visible, but this is a rough analysis of a rough chronology of main changes in the landscape of actors, in the landscape of legal and normative frame, and in the materialized results in this city. But also very important in the size of resources that have been invested in this process. So my findings from this kind of analysis indicate that this normative change that has been underpinning the physical change took place before, during, and after the 2012 summit. And it was long, it was gradual, and it involved the participation of various research institutes, both local but also institutes based in Moscow and Petersburg. Contrary to this normative change, the resources in the case of Vladivostok have been quick to arrive. They arrived very quick in preparation of the summit, and they were massive in scale for the size of the city. And very interestingly enough, they continue to appear in both the city and the region of Primorie. And in that case, and this is also evident in the attention that has been paid in Vladivostok also in the previous year with the removal of capital functions from Khabarovsk to Vladivostok, and the pronouncement of this process as a national project for Russia itself. So the growth and internationalization and the increase of power, regional power of Vladivostok has been assigned a national aim, national significance for the whole federation. So in that process, the influx of resources has resulted in significant material change. This has been more expressed in spectacular projects, infrastructure projects, such as the new bridges or the extension, the improvement of the airport, or the new highways, or the huge new infrastructure for the Federal University and its campus in Ruski Island. But these massive and spectacular projects have been actually a bit outnumbered projects for the improvement of public spaces. So the planning for the summit created a frame where the city was mainly treated as a hub for logistics and events, and less than a city by itself, for itself, and in itself, with its existing problems, which are many. So in that process, the layer of actors was rather thin, and remained so even after following the summit. So even after following the summit, the share of people who were active in the creative industries and knowledge-based economy was very marginal, very small in the city. And this has slightly changed in the last few years, also as a result of the federal program for the comfortable urban environment. And in that case, in more recent years, there have been a couple of cracks with knowledge spin-overs and international exchange and private entrepreneurship and association with Asian, Korean, Japanese bureaus and creative industries. So this is growing, but this is growing slowly, and this is growing a bit slightly independent from municipal planning. And closing the analysis of this case, I describe this process as a process of perpetual boosterism that has resulted in a normative change which has been long and gradual, preceding the summit, but also following the summit. It has resulted in resources which were quick and continuous, mostly federal. It has resulted in a significant physical output, but which remains unfinished because the emphasis has been on spectacular projects, so that small urban spaces have been re-improved or refixed ever since. You can see this picture. This is 2017, and this should have been finished by 2010 already, but it is still like that. Same goes with some of these areas here because of conflict due to legislation, because this used to be military office and, military territory, and the other part was federal territory. So there have been some kind of legal conflicts with regards to land uses that were not solved in advance and are still slowly proceeding. But the main finding from this case has been the fact that there has been an actor landscape which is actually gradually changing and overcoming, slowly bypassing the municipal authorities. So what we see is federal agencies cooperating with Japanese agencies, and small young private creatives being in this part of in-between situation. And in the meanwhile, the municipal authorities the municipal planning departments seem to be slow to follow this kind of fast track development. This was the findings of Vladivostok. With that, I will be going to the center of Siberia, to the city of Krasnoyarsk, and the specific city center, actually the embankment, the main waterfront of Krasnoyarsk, the Nabережная of Yenisei, a very impressive place. It's the revitalization of this place. It's a typical case of revitalization through typical public space repairs and change of uses. My analysis shows that this revitalization has been actually long discussed in domestic circles, and so a very vivid expression in the last few years in Moscow with the municipal program first, and then in the country with the federal program. And here I'm looking at how this federal program came to fit in the ongoing municipal debate, local regional debate in Krasnoyarsk for this space, for this public space. And I would be arguing that here revitalization has been of a specific local variant. It has a specific local twist. What have been my findings here? My findings have been that when one initially, when one starts looking at the material produced by Strelka about this federal program in the last years, the first impression is that this has been happening now for Strelka by Strelka in this program. But in reality, when one starts looking at when one looks at the local debates and the local history, it's quite easy to see that that no, everything. Both actors were there before the program, and municipal projects were there before the program, and so this federal program was only a small fragment in a long chain of existing attempts to revitalize this area. This has been ongoing, and it has been in a dynamic relation to actors, and the main difference with Vladivostok has been that the resources dedicated to this process, to this long process, have been much less. Of course, because we're talking about a specific land area, so there's no comparison. It's just that proportionally for the amount that would be required and the effort that would be required to revitalize these parts of land, the resources that have been allocated throughout the last 15-20 years have been quite small. So what my finding is that the federal program was actually seen as an opportunity by actors who actually, and as soon as the resources were allocated, the municipal program was kind of modified. So there was a merging of processes, and things started happening due to this federal push, and also in anticipation of the Universiade, which would happen in the next year. So my analysis for this space shows that going back to history, actually, the embankment has become in the last 15-20 years a prime area. So it used to be an empty area in the Soviet period for leisure and just having free time and free public space. But clearly, after the market economy, it started becoming an object of desire for many private actors, and to that one could attribute some of the delays that happened in the previous 10 years. But as soon as the federal project was into force, things started moving towards this kind of proper revitalization under these guidelines that pushed for pedestrian areas and friendly materials and so on. And this material, as a result, has reflected a wish from the side of these actors to make this embankment appear global, to make this embankment become global. And so there is a very interesting switch in these debates between global and local, Russian and Siberian, and this kind of discourse. But I will not go deep into that. Yeah, also time. So yeah, the physical change has been small, but has been promising. There have been many stakes involved in this process, also due to the Universiade and the important regional actors that invested through private partnerships in the entire length of the waterfront that actually became was repaired in the course of 2018-19. And in that case of Krasnoyarsk, what we have is an actor landscape which has been very dense and very dynamic, often conflicting and often unclear about intentions and outcomes and principles guiding actions. But it is nonetheless a very dynamic, quite more dynamic landscape of actors than in the case of Vladivostok. And with that, I will go to the third case, which is a case situated in a much smaller city. So it could seem a bit unfair to talk about the small city of Achinsk in comparison to Vladivostok, which is an important port becoming internationalized, or the important city of Krasnoyarsk nearby, which is a regional center. It is a very strong city. However, I find this important because it is just one case, just one small example of a regional project which has been associated with the Russian aluminum industry in the Urals and the Western and Central Siberia. And it is also associated with the social responsibility program, which emerged due to a clear internationalization of Russian aluminum industry in the mid-late 2000s. So in that case, we have Rusal, which is a regional company, and it has it had to comply at some moment in the 2000s. It had to comply with international standards and adopted corporate social responsibility programs, which were then applied regionally in several cities in the Urals and Siberia. And so I'm using these examples from Achinsk, but these are findings that I assume could be replicated or could be found in many other of these cities in the vicinity of or the entire region between the Urals and Eastern Siberia. And in that case, what we have is a specific regional variant of participatory urbanism in the last 6-7 years. So this corporate social responsibility program explicitly sought to deploy participatory urbanism and promote civic engagement in these areas. But what my findings show is that what has happened in the normative level was first an external pressure from outside, so from international environment, which led to the creation of an organization structure that aimed towards an entrepreneurial community of actors in these small towns. And to them, they added an urbanistic component in this program, with Rusal allocating increasing funds for capacity building by inviting experts, by doing workshops, with actors from Moscow or Petersburg. So in that, what we have is an actor landscape which has had a small agency and has largely just tried to comply with the requirements from above. The city, the municipality, for example, can be seen adopting a managerial approach. The mayor can be seen looking to create public-private partnerships. But this is also all happening in the context of resource scarcity. With resources being large in the 2010s, for social programs in general, but quite small when it comes to material resources for improving material spaces, and all that in a context of an ongoing conflict or an ongoing general how to say not unhappiness, but an unequal relationship between the figures in authority in Rusal, in the managing boards, and the population in these small cities. Characteristic has been that Rusal has been a subject of international research, international news interest in just 2 years ago due to sanctions, which actually concerned the owner of Rusal, but which indirectly came to affect several of these cities in Central Siberia. So over there we see a very strange, a very unexpected kind of internationalization via this kind of sanction regime imposed upon smaller cities in Siberia. So in that, the analysis for this small program, but quite peculiar and interesting, has shown that there has been a normative change. It has been significant. It has been rapidly internationalizing in the last years. However, the actor landscape remains very thin and remains quite overwhelmed by this pressure to comply and to conform with objectives. The resources has been scarce, mainly in the level of knowledge because of the existing actually thin landscape, but also therefore the physical output has been small and has been limited in a few repair works in a few public spaces in this city. So there is both negative and positive outcomes in this case. But in general, if somebody tried to see Achinsk as a globalizing city, then this would be about the introduction of practices that refer to some kind of creativity or participatory planning. However, the thinness of the actor landscape and the thinness of the professional in this field, in this city, to my understanding, show that this kind of projects, to a large extent, they just reproduce themselves and do not bring significant change other than instituting small bureaucracies that actually perpetuate these programs. So in that case, one could say this kind of Janus-faced relation that I mentioned at the beginning, in the case of the big company investing the resources and having good intentions and goodwill, at least transmitted on the ground, but the reality being showing many times otherwise. Nonetheless, I don't really want to close with some negative note. I would just point out that even though this thing is happening, there is a mechanism that is actually linking this local small layer of actors to international policies for urban renewal. So, and additionally, this is a new program. This has been running for less than 5 years. So one could say that, yes, of course, these things need time. So proper coordination in regional level with assistance of Krasnoyarsk actors, things like that. So some could say that, yeah, these things could happen. And yeah, to close, I will try to wrap up all 3 cases now fast, saying that again, I have not been really interested in analyzing the similarities and the differences of these 3 cases, because these are 3 different cases and they have been implemented in entirely different cities in different parts of Russia. And but my interest lies in seeing these 3 cases as part of a broader process. The broader process is telling about the current discourse of urbanism in Russia, so the domestic discourse on urbanism, which is actually, again, new and young and developing. And here we have the idea of urban attractivism, which is, it is not expressed all the time, but it is evident in all these efforts for various reasons, either as a part of a federal vision, as in the case of the APEC summit in case 1 in Vladivostok, or as part of a regional and local effort to finally achieve a well-designed central public space for which everybody could be proud in Krasnoyarsk after all these years of indecisiveness. And or the highly localized but very internationalized case of attempts that try to introduce participatory thinking in planning in small localities such as Achinsk. So the weak points of these cases, such as the thin layer of actors or the few resources in the one case or the too many resources in the other case, they can easily be demonstrated in the failures of the outcomes, such as, for example, the small size of the repairs that were done in Krasnoyarsk, or the many cases of fraud and criminal activities in Vladivostok. But the strong points, the positive points of these cases, I find them more interesting because they are actually manifesting some kind of conditional adaptation of policies that actually can provide some kind of insight in international level and not just in Russia. And with that, I will be closing, adding that what we have in Eastern Russia is some kind of international or global ideas to transmitted in a place which is uncanny. It's not really accessible to many people, even within Russia. It does not draw attention to many people, even within Russia. But these are international policies that are actually, they are real and they have produced real outcomes in real places. What I have been trying to understand is how these policies are actually localizing, and to what extent these localities are becoming globalizing. So there is a duality of localization of the global and globalization of the local, through the transplantation of ideas via actors and norms and resources and so on. I have been trying to show that there is this kind of conditionality that has been constantly running across the cases. It has been dictated by the specificities of not only the Russian urban and territorial development system, or by the theoretical principles of beyond the post-socialist urban studies discourse, but by the specificity of this region. So this kind of longue durée of Siberia and the Far East, and this specificity of these cities that are, I would argue that they are in some kind of process of globalizing. And with that, I will close and thank you for your attention in this cloudy evening. And I'm looking forward for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I don't see questions in chat, so maybe I will start with some questions, and people formulate their questions as well.
Леонид,
Да.
я потом смогу дать некий комментарий, если ты как ты предоставишь время.
Questions first and then discussion. Yeah.
Потому что я два слова прокомментирую, потому что...
Но ты уже комментируешь. Сначала вопросы, потом...
Два слова, чтобы ты понял, какие аспекты. Какие аспекты, и ты сам решишь, когда, в конце или потом. Потому что я участвовал в разработке проекта «Тихоокеанское побережье Советского Союза». Тихоокеанское побережье Советского Союза. Вот я покажу коллеге. Коллеги, чертеж, видно?
Мало.
Это проект 89-го года. 89-го года Петрогор делал проект Тихоокеанского побережья Советского Союза, 180 бухт. И вся экономика, генеральный план Владивостока. И я участвовал в конкурсе на центр города Красноярска в 1977 году. Поэтому я смогу дать комментарий. Maybe better in English. Yes?
Russian is also okay, but if you can English, yeah.
I was involved in an urban planning institute, and we made plan. We made plan.
Все понятно.
Regional plan for Pacific coastline of the Pacific Ocean. Huge project.
You may take contacts of each other and then discuss more in detail. You may comment at the end briefly. If Vasileios is interested.
Vladivostok and so on. And Krasnoyarsk, central part of Krasnoyarsk also. Central part of Krasnoyarsk. And for Krasnoyarsk, especially interesting some cases about, we told a lot about Skolkovo in Moscow. But in Krasnoyarsk was created the science capital of Siberia, science capital, you know. The name of this center, scientific center of Krasnoyarsk, by Kirinsky, academic Kirinsky. You see, he was a friend of my father. He was a friend of my father. My father with Kirinsky in St. Petersburg, in Leningrad. Also, the next point, my special interest for Vladivostok also, because I was a schoolboy in Vladivostok. You see?
Okay, all your life is...
I know a lot of all this subject. And one day, I hope, after quarantine, we meet all together in St. Petersburg, and maybe it will be more easy and clear to explain, to show a lot of materials. And maybe I can help to our wonderful professor with some interesting cases. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. After quarantine, you can meet even in Krasnoyarsk or in Vladivostok.
Krasnoyarsk, yes, because Krasnoyarsk and Vladivostok is I'm so surprised, Leonid, that it's my maybe second and third birthplace, because my mother from Krasnoyarsk area, and my father was the chair of a cathedra of mathematics in Vladivostok University.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So I have a question, Vasileios, maybe you could precise. The three projects are very different scale, as you said, of very different political importance for federal level. And you used the words globalization and internationalization in all cases. So from what point of view? I mean, any big intervention in infrastructure with some improvement of urban environment in trends of modern urbanism, I mean fashion, is it internationalization, or you mean something different? And
no.
Globalization and internationalization means that there are international actors or planners or other, I mean, I don't know, designers or construction companies or materials. So from what point of view it's international? And also, second question is about globalization, localization. Also, okay, it's bigger or smaller infrastructure projects like embankment or bridge or whatsoever. How well it is used by locals. So the project was born because of some initiatives of federal level or national company or federal government or some political international reasons. But how local people accepted it, and is it comfortable or not? Do they use it or not? Does really urban environment became better because of this intervention, or it is something like foreign, I mean, strange area, not really used and not really in demand?
And Chinese factor.
And what? Chinese factor also. Chinese factor. Yes, it's very serious in reality. Yeah. Yes.
You mean tourists? You mean tourists or what? Chinese?
Yeah.
A lot. But it's real strategy factor. Japan, China, Korea. It's international aspects. Unfortunately, maybe fortunately, but it's a real global reality.
That's the first part of the question. That's very easy to answer for Vladivostok, because for Vladivostok it is clearly a federal attempt to internationalize, and lately it has been happening with the participation of Japanese architects as well, some part of these designs. So it is not, and also the opening of the port and the visa regime and all these things. So these are actually all over the place in the case of Vladivostok. So for Vladivostok, the answer is very easy, is internationalization in all levels, including creatives and economic investments and so on. But it has been also, it has been quite long. So even in the case of, this is I didn't mention that it's one of the characteristics of Vladivostok that after the Soviet Union, it became, the economy was to a large extent based on this import of cars, and so, which is a form of internationalization, and it's still there. And then it was followed by the factories of what was it, Daewoo, I think. So this is happening already. Even North Korea, to some extent, some ship workers and so on.
Shipyards?
No, it's ship workforce, and the shipyards, yes. But in the case of Krasnoyarsk, it's a very indirect thing because it's not international, but it is the designs that have been produced through this within this federal program in the last 3-4 years have been in coordination with Strelka, with Moscow's Strelka and so on, which is having this profile as a very international actor. So the planners and the designers and the architects and the theorists that are active in Strelka in Moscow are actually kind of bridging this, making this bridge, and they have these international projects and these events and so on. So via them, there is this kind of introduction of not of international capital or of international actors, but of some degree of morphological adjustment to contemporary urban trends. This is quite clear over there, because the previous projects by the previous mayor in the previous municipality were the traditional, the standard post-Soviet, so this kind of gardening or some small repairs, but not design. And there was a design in 2011-12, there was a design by Gazdan Project, so there was a regional design for this embankment, but it has not been materialized because there were no money, because the governor refused. So there were all this, and then there were scandals with some investors that wanted to build a hotel. So there is this kind of conflict that at some point stops because of the arrival of this federal program and the decision that, okay, we're going to invest this in this part. And in that there is, and if you follow also, if you follow the discourse that developed in the media, there is always this desire, there is always this approach that once we do that, it will be like Amsterdam, or it will be like Copenhagen, or it will be like New York, something like that. So there is this desire in the discourse level at least. So, but when it comes to Achinsk, it's not, of course, it's not international because there is no, but what is international is the fact that Rusal, because Rusal became international, Rusal had to comply and to create a corporate social responsibility. And in that, they came up with this special program that actually brings, invites Urbanica from Petersburg or invites other people and to do a workshop and to give some ideas about participatory design, which is a contemporary international trend. So, yeah, in that level, again, it's a very indirect thing. But in the case of Vladivostok, it's very direct in all levels. So when, yeah, and the second question, how it is used by locals. Again, in the case of Vladivostok, again, is a very rich case in that, and some could say many things because there is many places and many areas that have been changed. But at least for the case of Krasnoyarsk, which is a very easy case to identify because it's a very specific space, there are very mixed feelings because yes, it happened, but there were some. The construction was not good. A few weeks later, they had to repair it. Everything happened very fast because they wanted to finish it before the Universiade. And so there is all these small conflicts, but at least the last time I was there, 2018, the first part was there, and many people were saying that, yeah, this is good and this is the start of something good. And some other people were saying that they're wasting their money, they bring this money from Moscow and that should be our money, and so on. But of course, I know that the debate has changed because of the Universiade is finished, because now last year they had a big problem with the smoke, the scandal with the air quality. So I know that it has been changing, but I have not followed this event. It's impossible to. It was hard.
Okay, yeah, Vasileios, we have questions. So two people, Елена Серова in written form, in chat, you may read, and Alexandra Nenko will ask your questions maybe afterward. So in chat. It's about your interviews.
How many? Yeah, I had. Yeah, I can read. I have 33 interviews. Half of them were, not half, around 20 something of them were expert interviews, and the rest were interviews with, well, the general public, but not the general public exactly. There is always some association. So maybe there is some aspirant at the university, maybe there is some, so these people are not experts, but they are somehow associated. And then there was another maybe 15, 20 interviews with general public. So people I knew and some other foreigners or so on. But the official interviews are 33, 34. Second question. CSR in other Russian regions. I don't know. I know about, I only looked at that CSR by Rusal. I know that there are other programs. There are many other programs, CSR programs in Russia. I know about Severstal, for example, they had some similar program. In Krasnoyarsk, there is Rusal was also active in Krasnoyarsk city itself. And then there is Prokhorov, there is Nornickel, they are all active. But I have not followed CSR in Far East. I don't know that. COVID internalization, globalization. Yes, that's the virus. It's very important. And but the interesting thing is that one could see that the idea of the local is becoming, at the moment, is becoming again quite strong. And not only the idea of the local, but also the idea of the national state. And this is also very fascinating. At the same time, it's not about the end of globalization. It's about some kind of, I don't know how to define it yet, but I think I could see it happening that, yeah, we still have this kind of connection, and especially in the smaller Russian regions, there is this interconnection of experts and that try to support each other and try to build this kind of knowledge networks. I don't think that this is something that will stop, and I actually think that because Russia is used in this kind of more mobile and more distant way of planning regions and cities, and maybe it's not, maybe it's been good for Russia.
It's like our workshop. It's online, but maybe it's more international. But
exactly, yes.
Yeah. Alexandra, please, your question.
Yeah. Hi, Vasileios.
Hi.
Nice to hear you. It's really interesting, the topic you're talking on, and my colleague and me, we were following. Unfortunately, my colleague Maria now had to leave, but I have her question for you, and I also have some questions of mine. Well, I will ask you two of them just to shorten, and then I will ask the third one from Maria. So these are questions for actually some, let's say, conclusions for some not specific cases, but for your thinking on, let's say, some classifications and typology of the processes you are working with. So one question is about, do you actually define for yourself any indicators of globalization in terms of urban globalization of urban policies? So you have been talking and mentioning, for example, creative city and creatives included into the public participation process. You have been mentioning participatory design and participatory planning. You have been also mentioning some system design, not like local refurbishments, but some system design for the public space. Maybe there are some more, and I think that maybe you have already summed up some indicators through which you go on and say that this project is already a globalized one, yeah, because it shows this, this, and this. If do you get my question? Am I clear?
Yeah, I get the question. I have not attempted. I have been thinking about something like that, but I have not attempted to do that yet. But now, because it is only in the last months that it became a complete thing. But it was not. It was definitely not my driving force in the beginning. I actually wanted to avoid this as a starting point. But in late weeks, I have started seeing the possibility of making something like that, some kind of sketch of something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so, well, I think it could be a good summing up because when you go through comparative analysis of cases and when you speak about, let's say, different contextualization of the process of globalization, there might be some indicators which could, like, you are going through and you could get like sort of a tick. But another question is also actually about classification, so I'm sorry for that, but maybe you don't have an answer for that one as well, but it could be like a question for the for thinking, and it's about have you classified possible physical outputs which could tell us that this is a product of globalized urban policies. So you've mentioned this beautiful embankment in Krasnoyarsk, and you've mentioned some other public spaces in Achinsk. So what kind of these spaces should that be? And you actually mentioned mostly public spaces like recreation spaces where people can go out and the diverse spaces, all of these kind of things. But what about, for example, transport system, like zero vision or things like cycling routes and cycling infrastructure? So this is also included into the agenda. So have you somehow typified all of this projects which you have seen so far in your cases?
No, I have not. But the example of cycling of bicycle lanes, for example, is something that one could say that in itself it is an indication of globalization, because before 2010-11 there was no such discourse in Russia in general. Or at least that's what I know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that it appeared somewhere there in 2010-11 in Moscow, in some regional cities nearby. So in itself, the addition of that would be some effect of. So even in the discourse of Russia that I follow sometime, so there is some people who say they are urbanists and they are not exactly, but and there is this discourse that you have in Russia by yourselves. It is just your thing, and other people make fun of them, and they say like, okay, yeah, let's make bicycle lanes so that we become European. So there's this kind of discourse all the time. And in that case, if somebody took the bike lanes, it would be easy because it's this kind of trend, very specific. But if if somebody looked at the public space, recreational spaces, to some extent, there is some kind of, what I'm saying in my text, I didn't mention it here, but to some extent, this is also some kind of, because this obsession with the public space is also something new.
Yeah.
It was not there, a few years ago. And not just in Russia, it's in other places as well. It's generally something new. So yeah, to some extent, it could be something like the bike lanes, but to another extent, of course, there is a prehistory and so on. And if somebody wanted to go really deep, then I would have to be talking about architectural morphology and architecture theory of architecture, which is, that would be another discussion. It's possible, but that's another discussion. To some extent, I have followed that in the discourse. So the media discourse has actually developed to some extent along these lines. In the case of Krasnoyarsk, there was this debate about whether these things, they reflect the local tradition or they reflect the local craftsmanship, or what does it mean to be some simple creation, and what does it mean that we have Splitka, which looks like Moscow, and then it looks like Novosibirsk. But that's a very interesting discussion. But I try to stay a bit out because it has the danger of going away.
Well, of course, you can stay focused on public spaces, and they're already quite a vast object for this discussion.
Yeah,
that's true. And I really confirm that the public spaces and the bicycle lines, lanes, they are just quite an old thing, like maybe 6 years or 7 years, which I witnessed myself. I'm from St. Petersburg, and I work as an urban researcher, so that we know. I haven't introduced myself, sorry.
Good to know, yes.
So I have another and also quite philosophical question from my colleague Maria, and she's an economic geographer, and she's actually into studies of globalizing cities and networks of cities in our post-Soviet region. So she has listened to it. It was really interesting for her, and what she's asking, I will just read it out. So, did you consider Siberia and Far East as a frontier? It might be a frontier in two ways: for Russia as a political entity, and from point of view of globalization. So, frontier meaning, as you know, in California it was a frontier once for US, and so meaning that it's might it be a laboratory for some novel things going on, or it's just like, you know, just going after some trends?
No, this discussion is long. I think that if my topic was limited in Vladivostok, I would definitely talk about that, because that's a very strong point with all the literature about Vladivostok, the frontier. Before the Soviet period, during the Soviet period, now it's quite strong, and there was this interesting observation I made. So 2018, there was the Vladivostok was named the capital of the Far East. So the capital was removed from Khabarovsk. So this was 2018. This is, and then there was this administrative change in the territories, because the Buryatia was included in the Far East. So there was this kind of change, Buryatia and Zabaikalsk. And this is 26, I think, when was that, 26 years? I have it somewhere. What happened?
What do you mean, sorry?
No, that there was this administrative change that happened 26 years after the US
Khabarovsk had a strategy traffic location for domestic airlines.
Yeah.
It was the reason why Khabarovsk became the capital.
Yeah.
But now you're right, Vladivostok got this new opportunity.
Status, yes.
Status, and we can discuss it later. Thank you. But I also short reaction.
I'm sorry, I'm just sorry. Could you please end the answer if you haven't yet? Because
yeah, I was talking about the front. No,
let's finish with Alexandra and then.
Again, it's a deep. It's a deep discussion because it's not. Yes, there is this idea of the frontier in the Far East, but also if somebody goes deeper into Krasnoyarsk or into Altai or these areas, there are discussions. And I remember in Barnaul some discussions about these three national, in the end, like.
Waters?
Yeah, there is this kind of specific, and there is some local discourse which is again talking about the idea of the frontier or the union of civilizations and so on. But regarding the urban, I wouldn't say frontier exactly, but no, but definitely no. There is definitely something going on. Yeah, if I have to use the word frontier, yeah, it's much more applicable to Vladivostok because it is happening now, and it is quite strong.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question in chat.
Then one question about Krasnoyarsk. What about Tatashev Island? Tatashev Island, huge space in the middle of Krasnoyarsk, like Krestovsky Island in St. Petersburg, bigger. Why till now, no any infrastructure for relax, for going in for sport, for leisure time, no problems in design. We doesn't need any kind of Strelka companies from Moscow to suggest extra know-how. It's funny. In reality, they can bring really these standards from Tverskaya Street to Krasnoyarsk to Vladivostok to something like that. Please give comments.
I agree, because if you look at the projects of Krasnoyarsk Krasna project, there is a knowledge, there is a local knowledge. It exists. And
I think that public spaces, it's very important issues, but it's not strategic issues. It could be no problems to realize it. If it will be political will, enough money, you can ask who pay taxes in Krasnoyarsk region, in Krasnoyarsk directly, this company, Rusal and something like that. What quantity of taxes from Rusal just located in Krasnoyarsk? It could be used for these public spaces and so on. No, it's typically political issues. It's not problems with us as architects. You architects, me architects.
I know, and this is very visible in the case of Achinsk, because even Krasnoyarsk is much better than Achinsk, but Achinsk is a city with a big budget problems.
Of course, like 100 cities in this country.
Yes. Yes, we have one question in chat, but also it's very long. You may read, or maybe Tain, maybe could you explain in voice maybe better what do you mean, because Tain is from India and the question is connected with India. So please, instead of reading, it's long. Maybe you would explain.
Directly towards the project. Comparing to the situation in India, where the government has announced the 100 Smart Cities program the basic assumption is that by creating 100 smart cities, including 6 major metropolitans, the population of now secondary cities are to internationalize, employ unexpected high-end manufacturing and industrial economies. But this assumption is discussed as largely industry-driven, and existing farm-based and local planning is purposely neglected. How would you suggest that one conditionally adapts if it's a rural area? Can you elaborate on degrees of localization on degrees of localization of the international, in this case, technology, in the context of rural? Thank you.
Maybe, yeah, then maybe you.
So are they? No, I just have one question. Are they actually planning to relocate population, skilled population from the major metropolitan areas, or are they expecting to? How are they expect this smaller cities to become internationalized?
Because the process now is to turn all the cultivable land, agricultural lands, into plots for big commercial companies, and then use the farmers or people who have been not skilled, but kind of turn them into, legal workers or support workers in the companies, and have new people come to the villages from outside.
From the cities?
From the cities, yes. So this kind of situation is kind of happening, and there are a lot of protests about land grabbing and how secondary cities are now being international. So I think it was very interesting for me to see how not just secondary cities, but rural areas that are now being converted into secondary cities.
No, I was not aware of this program at all. It sounds very big. But my first question would be, what is the time frame of this program? Because it sounds like a very strong social transformation and transformation of the nature of work. And if you don't have skilled people, it will take some time to take some time for them to become skilled. And also it will take some time for infrastructure to be created in the secondary cities and so on.
Yes, it's about 20 years, I think, from 2014 to 2034, 2040, I think.
Okay.
But there are now conversations about how we should study the strengths of the rural areas and not really expect global companies to come there, because all of Global South is competing for smart cities to be the next best smart city. So
in that, this discourse, I have been following a little bit of this discourse. But in that case, are these cities expected to become fully smart in this sense of the word, that is actually including smart, everything smart, smart waste management, smart traffic, and so on, right? I guess.
Yes, but that is the plan. But the reality of it is, it doesn't even have, some places do not even have the basic infrastructure like roads and public transport. So it needs to be more of a bottom-up situation, but many countries are assuming that the smart mobility systems, smart traffic management are required and being invested into. So there's like a big chaos. A lot of projects have been dropped. So if there's a way to, I particularly like the word conditionally adapt. So if there's a way to adapt rural areas, but still bring technology into their market, because even with COVID and everything, there are people who are attending classes, staying home in the rural areas because they have mobile phones. So that was my question. Excuse me.
I can't. It sounds like a very big, huge endeavor. I think I would, if I were to study that, I think I would just choose one city, or choose a small part of that, small component, because in the entirety of it, I cannot even conceive it, how it would be happening. But in the small scale, I would, I don't know, from what I've understood, I would go for as possible coordination as possible, and as much coordination as possible, and as much trust building processes between the local populations. And
I agree.
authorities and planning authorities, because what my experience is that the absence of trust, or the absence of transparency is very important. And what we discussed before about the budgets in the small cities is exactly this thing, because me as an outsider, I could distance myself and say, okay, some of these people have good intentions, some of the other people, I don't know what kind of intentions they are. And it seems that there was some result because there was some good intention in the end. But I think that for many of these people who are outsiders, they are completely hopeless and they're completely negative, because they know how this has been going on. It has been completely non-transparent for many years. So I find this quite sad. And I think that, yeah, if somebody moves to that direction in the next 20 years, there is time to build some trust. So I'm not talking about planning or ideas. But I'm also kind of talking about ideas, because the point with ideas is that sometimes they're not easy to explain or to transmit, or sometimes people assume that this is something, evil or negative.
Yes.
That would be.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Other questions, or if there are no questions, maybe comments. So.
Леонид Эдуардович, можно мне?
Можно.
Да.
Hi, Vasileios. I don't have any questions. My thanks to you for this study and your comments. I think that it will be interesting and useful, not only for Eastern regions practice, but for federal policies too. And thanks you for this interesting research.
Oh, thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, other comments.
Leonid, maybe I'm sorry that I take a lot of time. Also, I connected that many thanks for this seminar, and best wishes to Vasileios.
Thank you.
And I believe that one day we organize meeting, not through Zoom, in reality. Next extra fantastic idea to going together to Krasnoyarsk one day, really, without joke, because I planned going to my second birthplace, because we made plan for this new sleeping district, which located in the former aerodrome. Yes, you know, this is a huge district, and till now a lot of discussions about future of plan of Krasnoyarsk. And I return back to Krasnoyarsk, Stockholm. It's so interesting to organize some interview with the people who worked in the science center of Siberia in Krasnoyarsk. Because it's a difficult, it's not some politicians, but real scientists who can really give some new ideas for all questions under your research. They know a lot inside all this system. Smart city, also very popular modern subject, but to my mind, it will come. It will come with the global development. But environment, so important, real environment, to return back to Krasnoyarsk fresh air, because it's a completely disastrous what happened in Krasnoyarsk with aluminum industry. You know that Yenisei don't frost in winter.
I know.
Maybe our colleagues can take and imagine that before tram going from the left to the right bank of Yenisei during the winter through the tram line without a bridge. Tram line going through on the ice to the right bank of Krasnoyarsk in Krasnoyarsk. The same, maybe you see, it's a beach of Vladivostok. You see picture. It's a central part of Vladivostok. Vladivostok. It was excellent beach in the downtown of Vladivostok. It was excellent facilities. Now it's impossible because quality of water it's terrible. It's after 30 years, everybody going to the Shamara, to the Okeansky district, to the island Ruski, to the suburbs, but in central part of Vladivostok, now important to have a real facility. Maybe the questions to Leonid, I forgot the name of one man who going in the swimming pool every day. Do you know this this person? Leonid?
In Vladivostok?
No. I read in internet that one man going in swimming pool every day.
Now?
Do you know the name of this man?
No. Our president?
Yes.
Yeah.
And in this case, I want to ask, without jokes, because no any facilities to going in a real sport for students, for school children in Vladivostok, in Krasnoyarsk, to use real, no problems. How to organize it without not science research, but step by step realize not some huge students Olympic Games in Krasnoyarsk, to realize some simple system, but give opportunity to attract and organize quality of life with a very simple infrastructure. I think most complicated comments maybe later with economy. Maybe Zubarevich gave it in sophisticated way. I don't want to translate some ideas of Zubarevich, but in our urban principles, I think that everything is clear. Everything is clear. How step by step to improve environment and maybe some social net to attract people, because the problems with the populations in Vladivostok and in all my school friends, a lot of school friends from Vladivostok also removed to Moscow. Far East, every year, empty and empty. No population. No population. It's a global issue. Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe other comments from other participants. Yeah, if not, so yeah, it's time to finish. Just to summarize. Also, I would comment that it's interesting cases, but we also should remember that main problems of most of Russian secondary or non-capital cities are problems of economic base and economic reasons of existence. So if we have some specific federal programs to improve environment, if we have big companies who are ready to invest in social program and so on, it's okay. It may improve a bit, some parts, create some social spaces or improve urban environment in some places, but it will be only temporary improvements. After some period of time, again, they will have no money to maintain it, and general quality of life would not improve until these cities would obtain some resilience. I mean, some resilience to shocks. And they are, most of them, still in search of new functions and new meaning in contemporary world. And when we speak about globalization, okay, it's very clear in case of Moscow and other cases, maybe some international projects in some places, but for these cities, some new functions in this global world is most important. And I mean, there are many let's say capitals of rayon, capital of municipal districts, which didn't change much from Soviet time. Only buildings were not, and pavements were not renovated and abandoned and declining. They still have same shops like in Soviet times with same design, and they have no real demand because people are poor. People who have money, only officials or people in state sector like hospital, clinic, school, kindergarten. And there are retired people and some people who are servicing these people who are not very rich. So it's impossible to have modern retailing chains will not come there because demand is not enough. Not many people and people are poor. And other facilities, no restaurants or other infrastructure for tourists because too little tourists, and without infrastructure people will not come there to visit this place. And it's like I mean impasse, like unclear situation what for this city exists. Only to maintain somehow this population, which is getting aged, more aged, because young people leave to bigger centers, leave to universities, and there are just some towns which are getting older and older, you know, in all senses, and less occupied. And from the point of view of federal center, just some money which should be paid there in the form of salaries to teachers, to doctors, to officials, and retirement pensions. But no real income coming back from there, you see. Only some small taxes from small shops, which are almost bankrupt and which also don't pay taxes and avoid to pay them. So it's pure recipient of regional money from the point of region, and and federal center subsidize regions, partly to subsidize this type of municipalities, and it's a situation very common for great majority of smaller towns and cities. And until it will be somehow solved, we cannot expect big progress in urbanism and improvement of visibility of these cities, of their, I don't know, brand and environment.
That's why I chose Athens, because it was a risky choice because it's a small city, but it shares all these characteristics that you mentioned. But it could have been a much better city because it has a factor. It has two factors. It's not just Rusal, it's also Rosneft. So it has something, and it has a nice historic center. It could be better, but it's not. So it's all of these things that you mentioned are there. It's a very interesting case.
Yeah. It's a pity, yes, because of course in many such cases there is interest in historical heritage and the history behind it and nice people, but not clear what to do with all this and the ways how to revitalize, how to regenerate these places.
And even this discussion of regeneration, I remember very clear in both Achinsk and Yeniseisk on the north. There are regional programs very generous subsidies to restore buildings, to restore the whole historic center of Yensesk, and to restore most part of the historic center of Achinsk, beautiful, from the 17th, 18th centuries. But the question is, okay, as soon as you do it, who will visit these places?
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry. I remind one talk with Yerofeev, writer. You know, Viktor Yerofeev, writer. Famous writer. It will be interesting for you because his father was a diplomat and worked together with Kalantai in Stockholm during the Second World War. You know, Yerofeev, he was an advisor of Kalantai during the Second World War because Kalantai was an ambassador of the Soviet Union during the Second World War in Sweden.
Okay.
And Yerofeev, when he been in Blagoveshchensk, you know Blagoveshchensk, he took part in some literature seminar. After that, domestic people show how they rebuilt historical part of Blagoveshchensk. Show some old buildings. But after that, Yerofeev took and compared this some heritage in nice way, few pieces, but at the same time, he looked in another bank of River Niva, of River Amur, and there, huge megapolis of 21st century.
Yeah.
And he discussed about, of course, it's very important to reduce
Chinese city, yeah?
Chinese, exactly. And it's so easy to compare some kind of maybe very important issues, but we look some neighbors, what happened. Just it's reality. I don't comment later, but one last my questions to Vasileios. Vasileios, what do you think? East or West? Stockholm is best? Is it true? East or West? Stockholm is best. Is it true? You don't mention anything about Stockholm. Maybe some principles, some know-how. Because when you mention about globalizing, you are not, as I understood, you just now in Stockholm, yes?
Well, but now I'm in Petersburg, but no, in general, yes.
Stockholm. St. Petersburg now.
Yes.
Because when I mentioned it's Stockholm, you know what is that?
I don't see this.
You see?
Ah, yeah.
You see? It is Swedish global product. It's Swedish key. It's used through the world in 20th century. I will use it next week to improve my water supply system. It means that some know-how. And do you know what is this product? It's Björn Borg tennis racket. Björn Borg tennis racket. And in this case, my last issue that one day I hope that anybody from Krasnoyarsk University and anybody from Vladivostok University one day will be Nobel Prize winner in any kind. Maybe it's strange to tell about it, but why not? Why not? Because I know some people who could do it, could realize it. And it will be a real global result. Thank you for attention.
Yeah. Okay, Vasileios, is not responsible for Sweden or for Nobel Prize.
When we discuss some kind of
your associations are very vast. Nobel Prize, Stockholm.
we discussed about public spaces. I immediately want to return to you that when we talk about Krasnoyarsk, Rusal, it's so very maybe important. But Krasnoyarsk, Skolkovo, maybe rather more important.
Yeah, if it may succeed, if there may be real good schools and attract people from other countries. I don't know. Okay, so it's time to finish. And Vasileios, thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you for coming. I hope you will find good flights to go back. But we'll keep in touch, and
Yes,
also we'll ask you, if you don't mind, we